All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Today I have Kyle, Nick, Ryan, and John, some MSP vendors that have come together today and talk about the threat landscape, threat models, and hacker techniques that are out there. I'm Brian Weiss. I'm from iTech Solutions, MSP out of San Luis Obispo, California. And I'm very excited to get the chance to moderate this. I actually went through a breach myself last year in 2018, and it woke me up to a lot of what we're going to talk about today. I'll give you a little background about me and where I came from, and then we'll jump right into the panel and start getting into the threat landscape. So we started in 2005, and we've grown to a size of about 2,000 endpoints that we manage across 80 clients. And last year in March, Friday night, one of our RMMs were infiltrated, and they worked tirelessly until Monday morning. Apparently that was when they got off, and infected about half of our clients. About 34 of our clients were infected with ransomware, and it was quite the eye-opening experience. At first, I thought it was another ransomware attack until I realized it was localized to us. I found the RMM, did the SQL queries, found exactly every single system that they hit. It was about a 2-week remediation process, and to date, I only lost 4 of those 30 clients, which goes to speak on how great my team was. I want to give a thanks to my team that really helped us get through that. The total damage was about $500K gross, about $250K hard losses, and the insurance ended up covering about $150K of that. So today, what we're going to talk about is, we have vendors here getting together to basically talk about security issues and how to protect ourselves as partners and our clients. We are going to have some questions if we can get to it. If we can't get to the questions, we will make sure we answer those afterwards. So I want to step right into the threat landscape and kind of what we're dealing with. What do we see today as the overall landscape? Would someone like to jump in and comment on that? Ryan?
You want me to go?
Yes.
Or Kyle, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. I think one of the things, like Brian shared, is the landscape isn't the same anymore. Clearly, there's actors out there that realize we, as providers of services, are lucrative targets. We're tracking internally about 37 MSPs, just like Brian, who've been used as a vector to gain access to the clients and encrypt the data. I think this is not news to a lot of the viewers, definitely not news to us as a panel, but maybe the biggest news here is we as a community are working together, right? Security is a thing that we're setting aside, and we've really taken the time to distill all the best practices, what are people actually doing, how they're doing it, and really trying to take, I guess, efforts as a group to say these are the step-by-step biggest things that people can make a change within their MSP or within their community to be able to minimize the threat that's going on. Would you guys agree that's kind of it? The landscape has become really rough?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the trajectory we're on. I think it really started to pick up. I certainly noticed an increase in activity in the fall of last year. We're almost a year from that time. And I would easily say there's been a 400 or 500% increase in the amount of activity, specifically targeting MSPs and their end users. And as we go through the panel, we'll talk about what some of those contributing factors are leading to that. But yeah, I think the landscape is solidly here, and we know it's not a one-time thing. It's not changing. MSPs and their end users are a target, and again, I'm just super excited to be part of this and help share knowledge about what the vendors are getting together and doing, and what we can do to help MSPs themselves be safe. So I don't know, Nick or John, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's definitely not discriminatory. We're seeing MSPs of all sizes, all different types of geographies and specialties, and so it's really, Ryan, to your point, the pace has really picked up, and it's something to me that it's very unprecedented. So this is going to take a concerted effort by all of us, right? Working together, and hopefully we can tackle these problems together and reduce these threats.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things with the with this paradigm shift. It really makes sense why this is happening if you look at it from a big picture perspective. The goals to try to affect as many of these endpoints as possible. The way that MSPs are structured and the function that they provide is a prime distribution network to be able to spread that influence.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think all of us have talked in the past several months at various different times, and we're all independently seeing increases in activity from our viewpoint of the MSP landscape. And we're starting to see, we think, more distinct threat actor groups entering the market, and it's not necessarily always productive to fingerprint which threat actor is targeting you, but just the general point of, whereas in the fall of last year there were maybe one or two or a few, we definitely think there's over half a dozen now distinct threat actor groups. So not only that's contributing to that increase, and you talked about the incentive to go after more networks, or larger number of endpoints. Well, there's one logical piece of that is higher ransom, and I think you can share some of this, John, about like the types of ransoms that we're seeing and we're hearing our MSPs getting held for. But the ransomware as a service industry actually incentivizes these attacker groups to hold large networks for ransom. They get discounts for larger networks. And ultimately they get bigger payouts, so that they make a better margin, right? Because it's a business. It's a business. So their margins are better if they're owning entire networks. And so we think that combined with just kind of some of the methods of delivery of service and how MSPs tend to service multiple clients makes them a very interesting target. So I don't know if you want to speak to the ransom piece.
It's along the same lines, right? So in fact, I was talking to somebody yesterday. We all know Chris, and he was mentioning that it started out, say last year at this time, it wasn't uncommon to hear a ransom of like 20K, but now, it's not unreasonable to see people asking for over 7 figures. It's crazy because they are incented, right? So it's like almost like the perfect storm. They're incented because they get more for the larger piece of the pie, and then naturally because of that, the ransom goes up. And there's other factors I'm sure we'll talk to, with cyber risk insurance and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, this is not, as more actors get into this space and they copy that model, it's really, it's going to increase the velocity of both the attacks and the dollar value that they're asking.
So I've actually read that this is a $1.5 trillion industry now, cybercrime. And I'm curious if anyone could speak to kind of how often you see MSPs maybe getting hit lately or attempted to get hit.
So we collaborated earlier, like this month, in preparation of this event, and do we agree maybe up to 3 a week or something?
Yeah.
Like, as an audience, think about that. Like, you could be one of the 3 this week that get compromised. Like, that's a...
Yeah, and another interesting point to that is we're all seeing 3, but that's not the same 3, right? It's not necessarily the same 3 MSPs, so it's probably actually more than that. So again, that speaks to that velocity piece. It's probably more than 3, but independently, we think on average we're seeing about 3 a week.
And and that's just what's reported.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And to your point, this is really the perfect crime. I mean, if it happens and someone can hide it, they don't want people to know that it happened, right? And that's where we're getting into a lot more compliance with GDPR coming to US, where we have to report on what's happening. So we talked a bit about the threat landscape, and I'd like to move on to some threat models, maybe what you guys are seeing. What type of attack vectors, things like that, are you seeing right now?
Yeah. So we talk about threat models in the security space. It's basically a method of an attacker acting on their objectives. It's how they do what they do. As Brian discussed, RMMs have been kind of smeared recently as being a favored tactic for entry into MSP networks. I mean, if you think about it, it makes total sense. It's kind of a ready, build, command and control botnet already deployed, ready for the attacker to use. All they got to do is pop a cred or get on a tech workstation that has RMM open, and it's kind of it's a built-in delivery mechanism. So I think that makes logical sense, but it's certainly not the only thing that we're seeing. Kyle, maybe we can hand it over to you, and you can share some of what the other models are that you're seeing.
Yeah, so maybe piggybacking. It's always about analogies, right? It's not crazy that bank robbers like to drive fast cars. Why would they, hackers not want great RMM products to be able to abuse? At the same time, credentials.
Yeah.
I think Nick knows that firsthand. Sometimes it's just knowing thyself, right? What exposure, what type of attack surface is out there? How are you auditing? We all had conversations about this yesterday of how often are we truly auditing our MSP or our perimeter? Nick, you live in credentials. Your whole job is seeing compromise of credentials.
That's really that's one of the biggest things that we're seeing is not only just the widespread availability of credential sets, whether it be for RMM platforms or cloud-based services. These are being categorized, pulled together, and resold. And it's cheap, and it really is. And it's like you're just talking about it being that business. That business, along with that business, comes along with the ability to market the wares that they're peddling, to do all of those things, and they're very good at providing quality service to their customers. I mean, it's true, and it's not just those platforms. You have RDP credentials, as an example, are being sold and things like that. So yeah, they're out there, and the exposure's there. So
I think that's
you need to really take care of that.
I think that's probably the second most widely used threat model that I've seen from the MSPs that I've collaborated with, is that attackers coming in through RDP. I don't know, Kyle, you have some distinct thoughts on this, or maybe even something to share? Yeah,
we got a video. We're all about, right, we're security nerds here on this panel, and so we put together some videos of showing what this looks like. So let's bring that up here, and maybe I'll narrate a theoretical, what it actually looks like. So in this screen you're seeing right now, this is the shady hacker, in its underwear in the basement somewhere, right? The next screen that we're going to come up, right, is going to be our Windows 10 victim. And so you see these two different screens, and you notice right away attackers are all about trying to identify what's on your perimeter. So I'm using an open source tool called Nmap here, and its whole goal is to figure out, what does your external attack surface look like? And you see what comes up for this IP here that we're attacking. It has 3389, which engineers obviously know that's going to be remote desktop that's available on this host. So we use another brute forcing tool called Hydra. It's free open source. And we go after those common usernames like administrator or the scanner account. And I'm sure some of you are like, I've got that user exposed already. I tend to, when I want to brute force, or whether I'm buying credentials, I love to see how many times that it's a good old-fashioned keyboard walk or a pattern, right? You went up, down, one side of the keyboard and down the other. And you can see here this tool is meant to be fast. Within a couple of seconds, we tried 120 passwords because there was group policies that weren't set. With that said, we've got now a user administrator, and we have a password that's affiliated with this account. I think we all know where this is going. This is the attacker who just happened to find that one RDP host that was open. And so I'm using an RDP tool here. I plug in the password, and voila, just like how you remote into your own clients' systems, they now from their box have a terminal, right? They have a remote desktop session. A lot of us don't think about what happens next, right? As the attacker's in your network, it's great to think about the big effect, but you don't think about the leverage that they had to do to get there. Like, were they an administrator? And in this account, they went after the built-in administrator account. The very next thing, though, is these attackers are in your MSP network, they're asking, where do I go next? Because maybe this terminal services server wasn't actually that attractive. All right, maybe they need to go get admin credentials, like a domain admin instead of local admin. So you notice here in this demonstration, I used a free tool called Mimikatz. This is something that we see very often, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more. And you notice right away the hackers run into common problems that you would think hackers would do, like maybe their antivirus stopped them. As an MSP, we always think about that as one layer, but you'll notice this video escalates real quick, that they noticed that they were blocked by the antivirus. Now, how do I get around it? That's part of their tradecraft, or the techniques that we're talking about here. These hackers are prepared to operate in your MSP network, and they generally know the tools at least as good as you do. So we see what I've done is I'm taking a look and showing in this video here that the antivirus gobbled up my files, but I'm continuing to use other tools that I just downloaded, like PsExec. It's an administrator tool that's going to allow me to open up a privileged command prompt here running this system. And we see it goes one step to another, that within, what are we, probably 2 minutes into this demonstration, now this hacker's gone from initial access to going to the point where they're saying, you know what, I want to see if I can actually escalate and maybe gather those privileges or credentials. And so we notice that the first thing I'm doing here is, once again, importing files into the registry to disable that antivirus. Can I bypass some of it? And you notice it actually told me that I only partially disabled the antivirus. So once again, we're going to try to restore those files. The hackers are in your network fighting through it, and we all think of this, as Brian mentioned, the end result. This is what they were doing from Friday till Monday. We go in here as the hacker. We've got the antivirus that's now clearly in a rough situation. It's telling me, yes, I did catch some of these files, but the hackers are aware of how your antivirus works at the end of the day. And where we're going to see this goes is it goes exactly where you see it is. It's files that are caught, and their whole goal is, can I just get this malicious program to run one time? So going back to our command prompt, now that we see we're looking at the antivirus, now everything's disabled from my registry script. We'll toggle some tamper protections, show that yes, we can turn it on, turn it off. But what we've done here is, as the attacker, we've done everything we needed to go from external access to getting into the network to disabling whatever preventative security was in the way, to the point where we're really here just finishing up the job. Our job was from the get-go to gather credentials. So we once again copy those malicious files. We see that it said, oh, I'm still catching the threat. That's that antivirus partially working. But we know how this is going to end. The hackers are going to get credentials one way or another, right? And we see in this final demonstration here, there it is. Mimikatz is now running despite all those things, right? And you'll see that Windows Defender here is trying its best. It even says, like, please reboot your computer. I know that something bad's going on, but the hacker doesn't care. They're there to get this done. And we see what happens, right? With a couple of keystrokes here, I'm able to go and actually uncover other users that are logged in. And that's usually how it happens, right? They start with one user in your network, and then they pivot. And they tend to go after that user that doesn't have two-factor. Sometimes they even audit the user groups first and say, I only want to go after that credential. And the video just ends exactly where your brain could imagine it would go. They took a look to see who else is logged in. They compromised that user account's password earlier. And just like that, they go and they went from one user here, now using that credential that they captured out of memory with Mimikatz, and they're in. And if you notice here, this user might have already been logged in. They've got QuickBooks up, they've got O365, or maybe they're creepily browsing something on Craigslist. But regardless, I think that's a great example here of how this situation escalates. And that probably brings us to some of the stuff that you could ask, Brian, of like, what are we seeing in the wild? How does this relate?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that video got me a little emotional, bringing me back to my attack. So I apologize for any of you out there. But yeah, I mean, one of the models that obviously is the most widely used is the RDP. I'm seeing some with IT documentation as well, though, which sounds pretty serious because you're storing passwords in IT documentation, right?
I'm fairly certain I'm not the only one up here that has seen this in multiple instances. I think it's this idea, and I have this mental model of think of an attacker like an electron. Whenever they hit resistance, they're going to go to a path of least resistance. Well, we've increased the resistance on RMM. We've removed RDP from the internet, and if you haven't, you should be slacking someone right now, telling them to shut that stuff off. But then they're going to look at the next thing. Okay, well, maybe that user that I have the cred for has 2FA enabled on the RMM, but do they have it enabled on an IT documentation platform? Do they have it enabled on their password management platform? And we've been working with MSPs where actually some of their logins to other platforms that were used as part of the attack were referred from a password manager. And so I think it's like, you really have to start thinking about what are all of the tools that I use in delivering service and how could they be used to perpetrate an attack against me or my end customers, and start like, job one is secure those credentials, do dark web searches on those credentials, make sure that none of your users have compromised credentials, and then job two is all of those platforms they're using, you have to keep them patched. Like they got to be patched, they got to be up to date, and you got to be talking to your vendors and making sure that they know, because all this stuff, like all these tactics boil down at the end of the day to two things: credentials and vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities. These attackers aren't creating 0 days. They're taking stuff that's already been out there that vendors have already issued patches for and leveraging them. So it's, this is like what we call living off the land. It's they're not doing anything especially interesting or unique. Yeah, they have, they have some more advanced knowledge. But yeah, those IT documentation password stores, I mean, I don't know if you're seeing that trend as well.
Yeah, and that as well, but to your point, Ryan, a lot of times the things that make us more efficient as an MSP are really opportunities for the bad actors, right? So, we start off with something and we have a base level of security and, we add components to it, but we don't as you were just talking about before, what we don't do is we don't take the big picture in mind and say, how could a bad guy really just crawl from one place to the next? Because they will, and they have time on their hand and you don't, right? So I think it's interesting, while we've, I'm sure we're going to talk about this more, but everything that we've done in order to provide tools to MSPs to make them more efficient sometimes come back to hurt us when we look at really they're just another avenue for exploit, right?
Yeah.
So we have to take the bigger picture in mind, really have to understand what the vulnerabilities look like in this environment as a user, all right? And then how that, what does that mean down to our customers?
Yeah.
So kind of three main threat models we've covered so far: RMM as an attack vector, OpenRDP, and of course IT documentation, password managers. Were there any others that stuck out?
The vulnerabilities in channel tech, especially on-prem deployed technology, where it's the MSP's responsibility to make sure that those things are patched and up to date. Any of that on-prem, it doesn't have to be an on-prem RMM. It's anything that allows remote access. Anything. Right. You have to keep that stuff that's again, like I said, the built-in command and control network. For that attacker, you got to keep that stuff updated up to the minute, because attackers are monitoring for vulnerabilities in those things, and they're going to use them when they see them.
I mean, it's a couple, I guess, tagging on to what you're talking about from that perspective, looking at how those different services are accessed, really protecting those credentials. Well, and not only that, but the authentication mechanisms, right? Having that second layer is critical.
Absolutely
there.
Critical, yeah.
And looking at seeing how you would identify or detect that some of those things are going on. The tools that are being used, like we were saying, are the tools that we use in order to provide for our clients. Mm-hmm. So the sort of footprint or the fingerprint associated with that, it can be very subtle. So it's really important to have those items in place in order to protect yourself all along the way.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
So threat models. Great information. Thank you. What about some hacker techniques? How are they getting into systems with some of these threat models that we're seeing?
Yeah. So vendors have been collaborating a lot. And one of the things that we're all seeing is the use of anonymizing proxy infrastructure, especially Tor infrastructure. I think the reason I call this out is not it's not a call to immediately go out and block Tor infrastructure and you're immune from these threats. Tor is one of N anonymizing proxy infrastructures that they can use. But if you're monitoring for it, it's an early indicator that an attacker is targeting you. In MSPs that we've supported, generally you'll see Tor activity about 3 to 4 days prior to the ultimate breach. So if you're looking for that activity, you get a 4-day kind of canary in the coal mine that someone's doing something and it's time to go shields up. So
yeah,
I think it even gets a little bit like even items or infrastructure that outside of what's anonymized, but what's being publicly used, or that's readily accessible from corporate networks, as an example. Having phishing landing pages hosted in GitHub.io, right? Like, I'm pretty sure that most of us don't block GitHub, right? And behaviors like that, where it's their trusted infrastructure that credentials are being collected, or malware is being downloaded.
Yeah, I think you see a lot about how Tor nodes aside, what's happening once they're in, there's different malware families or ransomware families. What are you saying about the indicators that MSPs can look for that those things are starting to occur?
So I think I can answer that with maybe a cool team story. we typically don't look at network traffic. So ironically, some of the best tips that came in about Tor traffic and how it was working with some of the ConnectWise Perch guys that look at network traffic, which immediately benefited us to help us figure out how some of the internal things were working. Ninja RMM team participated in some of that stuff as well, where they were teaching us about how Tor was used. And ironically, after the folks or the actors get in, say for instance, you didn't have those 4 or 5 days of pre-positioning, you then ask, what are they doing during those 4 to 5 days after? The things that bother me most, it's more, someone used the word living off the land, more abusing those built-in applications. Ransomware. They will use just about anything to be able to deploy your ransomware, and that includes your built-in tools, built-in operating system features. There's a lot of those indicators of compromise, and we've seen, as Ryan alluded to earlier, multiple threat actors. We even have to ask ourselves as we're collaborating as vendors, trying to disseminate information to the community, is this the same actor? Because they're using maybe, Sodin, Revel, Sodin Ikibi, whatever that crazy name for it is, or they're using Dharma or different ransomware. Is this truly different actors, or was there just a coupon code on the hacker ransom for service, so they decided they're going to use Ryuk or RYUK, however you say it the best. We do have a ransomware video. Do we want to save it a little bit? Do we want to share some of that?
No, I think let's do it. Yeah, and then we can talk a little bit about maybe how MSPs can get educated about these ransomwares and look for some of the indicators of maybe the command and control traffic or stuff like that.
Cool. So I'm going to ask the team to bring up the ransomware video. And the one thing that we get to see a whole lot is obviously you see the effects of ransomware. But you don't often get to see how it's done. So what these hackers have done, and I've shown here in this video, you see a lot of command.exe being used to run the legitimate start program that abuses PowerShell. Notice these are all things built into your operating system that they just happen to be leveraging. They use basic encoding techniques to get around. So in this video, in case anybody ever stumbles onto one of these indicators of compromise, you can use an online decoder, as I do in this example, just to figure out what they're abusing, what infrastructure, like the idea of GitHub, or I think if we'll see in this example, when I decode this base64 here, you see the text that it's doing all kinds of checking what architecture, but the end goal is, let me get the ransomware payload, and this is Sodin Ikibi, from Pastebin. Right? Being able to ask yourself, is there a legitimate need for Pastebin in my network? Or going out to GitHub without causing productivity outages is obviously a really touchy subject. But we see here, this is hosted on Pastebin, which is a trusted website. It's SSL protected, right? Everything that you want to as a hacker, it's there for us. And it's as simple as however they can get this file, whether it's a RMM, manually copying it in email, they just have to get execution. And once they get that execution, you'll notice here I brought up Process Monitor, and it shows you just real time how quickly things go from an okay day to a bad day on this host. And what we're seeing here, just scroll away, is this ransomware is using PowerShell. And it's just flying through there, walking each file. And you'll notice here in this demonstration, the desktop icons just changed, right? They all have that funky extension. They now have README documents all over this file system. But this demonstration here really is just to reiterate, there's a lot of these indicators of compromise. For instance, why did this initially start? Right? How did they log in? How did they get the tools into the environment, right? Did it come from Pastebin? Did it come from some legit source? And that's hard. That really forces us as MSPs not only to look for just the bad, but how can the known trusted be used for bad too? Right. So that's really it. I mean, the demo here is just showing at the end of the day, while this ransom is running, I'm filtering on the file extension, right? That random name that it adds to every encrypted file. And this is probably that aha moment that brings back more PTSD for poor Brian is, just look at every file here that's encrypted, and it's just brutal. Anything that's a text file, a Word doc, PNG, PDF, you name it, it's encrypted here. So, that wraps up that piece there.
Yeah. So I think one of the most important pieces is like understanding the tactics or the tools that the attackers are using. Just that we've been in a privileged position to help a lot of MSPs recover from these attacks, and just like in collaboration with these folks, we were seeing a lot of GandCrab towards the end of last year, which has gone away, and Sodin has replaced it. Question mark, same thing. then between Dharma, RYUK, Globe Imposter, Hidden Terror. So I think the point here is you should understand how these ransomwares are, how they behave, because there's indicators in their behavior that you can take within your network infrastructure, your endpoint infrastructure to detect or prevent some of those things from happening. And just like we saw Windows Defender try to prevent the earlier RDP attack, eventually they will bypass that layer of defense, but that layer of defense generates something that is actionable for you to know that something anomalous is happening. And that's really what you want to do, is you want to give as many indicators that something bad is happening that you can react to as quickly as possible, so that you can go in and take some sort of action against that things. But so I ransomwared all the files on all the MSP's end user servers. I'm done, right? I'm good to go. What comes next?
I mean, that's the question, right? What comes next? And I mean, Brian, in your case, right, is the hacker, maybe they're done. Maybe it's just was extortion.
Well, what comes next, other than freaking out, the worst day of your life, is really you're hoping you have backups, right?
Yeah.
So I'm noticing that now backups are getting deleted as well.
Absolutely.
Should we touch on that a bit? Maybe some trends we've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think it's news to MSPs, or at least some MSPs, that an attacker would target a backup. Ultimately, we have to remember it's a business, right? And they're trying to maximize the opportunity for them to get paid a very large ransom, as we discussed, sometimes in the 7 figures now, and maybe getting negotiated down to like $500,000. So they want to destroy all your recovery mechanisms. And this trend is, this can go as far back as like the Sony Pictures breach, where not only did they wipe every server, they also destroyed all the backups. Like this is the playbook, and this is what they follow. And so, in Datto's case, we saw this trend very early last year when it happened, and we took immediate steps to maintain one copy of a backup in a given data center. So that we've been able to help many MSPs recover from these attacks. It's certainly it's kind of your fail-safe, but we've seen we just, in the news, there was the DDS event where it was a dental backup solutions provider used not only to deliver ransomware as well as to destroy the backups. We've all worked cases where the MSP had to build your own backup solution and the attacker attacked and demolished that. So just a really important thing to be aware of is that they know your run book for how to respond to these things, and they're doing everything they can to null that out. Yeah. You've supported a lot of customers with these instances. What are you saying on that side?
It's the same thing. They'll go after the backups first. It's just common sense, because once they do that, then they know they have you, right? So it's really, really important. And unfortunately, we've seen some MSPs that haven't really done backups or haven't done timely backups, and in that case, it's just it's just game, set, match, right?
Yeah.
So this is like a vital piece of your business, right? Vital piece of your customer's business. So it's got to be diligent about not just doing backups, how you do backups, how you recover, how you protect yourself against from that single event that's going to really put you on your knees.
Yeah. So I think my call to action there for MSPs is have conversations with your vendors. If you build your own, you need to threat model this out and understand if an attacker has privileged access to your network, can they destroy your backups? If you have a solution provider, talk to them about your solution, how it's deployed, what their fallback mechanisms are for malicious deletes, what they're doing to add in additional protection layers for those things, and just really start to lean on your vendors to help inform you, one, of what's going on, and two, what their capabilities are, so that you have a really strong understanding that if this happens to you, what you can do. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to follow on with that. What we're talking about is, we're talking about layering the security mechanisms, right? That defense in depth strategy. The way that Kyle walked through this stuff, right, in his demonstration, it's like, well, it's just one hurdle after another that's being overcome. And the reality is that it's more. I think you got to think of it more in terms of the way that security doors or fire doors are built. The better mechanisms, or the more hurdles that are in place, gives you more of a time to respond and minimize the damage that occurs once or if they ultimately get to the prize, right? So, in being able to track those alerts and being able to see those logs as it's happening is something that's going to be critical to to minimizing the impact of the incident.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked about the threat landscapes, threat models, hacker techniques. How about some call to actions, takeaways? What's some information for our audience to go back to their MSP or the MSP they work at and put some call to action in today or tomorrow?
You want to go first?
I can.
Sure.
Yeah, go. Or Kyle.
That makes no difference.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things is multi-factor authentication. I think that's one of the biggest things that you can look at in order to protect protect those resources from getting.
I'd build on that with just good old-fashioned identity access management.
John and I over here nodding our heads on another
Yeah,
team.
exactly. As a whole, right?
Yeah, identity access management, like who are you? What privileges do you have? How quickly you can isolate this identity? And that's just good old-fashioned business practice, right? You have a technician who leaves, who had keys to the castle, and maybe they dumped from your IT resources, maybe some things like that. How quick can you rotate that out? That's good old-fashioned just business process, right? Business continuity. I mean, we were talking a little bit about how this played at some of your MSP. You built in some of that, right, or added some of this?
Yeah. So we're actually in process of moving to an SSO platform, but we immediately put MFA in place. Obviously, the minute you have MFA on 20 different tools, now you're wanting an SSO platform. So that's our next route. And we're even looking at privileged access management for our administrative devices. But I think one of the key items to understand here is that we as MSPs used to secure everything in-house. And now we've moved everything out into the cloud. But no one's asked the question of, okay, we know things were secure in-house and we know things are secure in the cloud, but what about the user credentials that are pinhole access through all of that security? And that's really where identity access management comes into play. Making sure that you know for certain that the person using those credentials is the person that those credentials are assigned to.
Yeah.
And definitely several layers in identity access management.
I mean, that's one of the big things that we talk about a lot is just the diversity of your tool set, right? Like the different vendor tools that are being used, whether your cloud-based services, whether be your Salesforce, your Office 365, all those things, having that mechanism as a part of your identity access management solution, like the SSO that you're talking about, has the ability to rein in the controls of that, so you have a clear picture of who has access to what, both inside and outside of your network. So yeah, it's absolutely true.
Yeah, I mean, like identity and access management, understanding if your credentials are on the dark web.
Absolutely.
Right, taking action
Absolutely.
on that. I mean, a gentleman in my team brought awareness to a threat actor that is posting passwords, cookies, and logged in sessions of MSP workstations to underground marketplaces.
Yeah.
And so like we're looking for that stuff, and I think other vendors are looking for that stuff and proactively reaching out to their customers to let them know, like, it's not just about MFA, because if I get access to your tech workstation and they're already logged in and I can replay that session, that's kind of game over. And there's kind of at that point, very little that we as vendors can do to protect you from that. Certainly, we're racking our brains thinking about some additional like post-authentication security mechanisms and collaborating on best practice guidance and stuff like that. But so I mean, that's like kind of your extreme scenario. There's even simpler stuff. Like we see, I've worked with MSPs that have been breached where their users have been configured in their tools since like going back to like early like 2010, 2011, 2012, and that user has literally been inactive for years in the tool. Maybe they forgot to enable MFA on that user. It's literally never logged in, and then that's the user that gets popped. And so like you have to manage the credentials that your users have and the roles they have in those platforms on a continuous basis. You have to be out there auditing, I would argue at least quarterly, going through all your channel technology solutions. Do these users have the right roles, the right permissions? Do they all have MFA enabled? Or the passwords that they're using on those platforms known to be compromised, being monitored for that, forcing password resets as soon as you see that stuff. Kyle, you and I were speculating on where we think maybe this is a little bit of like future crimes type of thing, but like maybe integration or API security in the next year or two, probably going to start to become a problem.
Yeah, this becomes one of those things that the password is the hurdle today, as Nick mentioned, right? You're jumping over these hurdles. When we harden things with two-factor, what's the next opportunity? Is it somebody's certificate that allows login, or some API grant and access or privileges, especially in cloud environments where things along those lines you can actually containerize or segment. But if you have the right token or have the right API, it's able to traverse all of these. Like, yeah, I think that's definitely some of it. If it's not happening already, I think it becomes ripe for the future for sure.
Yeah, so I think, sorry, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, but all the things that we're talking about today, this is like base level, right? If we were to record this and somebody saw this from like 3 years ago, right, they'd be like, what are these guys talking about, right? I mean, this is, the basic level of security, what we're saying on this panel, is really what every MSP should be doing. These aren't extras, these aren't add-ons. This is not making you like an uber secure MSP. These are table stakes, guys, right? I mean,
yeah. And again, that just goes back to like, we're not seeing exotic techniques. We're seeing very simple deficiencies in security postures being leveraged, and like that's the current wave we're fighting. And so we're up here speculating a little bit about future attacks, but like attackers are not incentivized right now to go down that route, because it's still so easy to do these very basic things. But I say that just to like, when you think about identity and access management, you also need to be thinking about your APIs, especially for your channel technology or any technology that you use to deliver service to your customers. Any place those API keys live need to be secured, multi-factor. Like, you need to take care of those things just as much as you take care of your technician and administrator credentials.
Yeah, and I'm going to go say it. I don't mean to not hard pivot, but I want to reiterate, Ryan and John, right, both CISOs of major companies or major vendors in our community. I mean, they both have data to prove this. I've talked to both of them independently. They told me they're actually in process or visiting clients, talking to clients, baselining the basics. And you guys both have like hard data on, hard conversations where, within the 30-minute checklist of going over the basics, you're finding these foundational things aren't done. So
yeah, I think John and I are mutual believers in the NIST cybersecurity framework, and running your MSP through that framework. It helps you identify where you might have some of these lacking or missing basics. But we were in a very privileged position with a small group of our MSPs. We actually embedded with them for multiple days to really understand their business, how they deliver service to their customers, their customer networks, their networks. We did NIST cybersecurity framework baselines, and we walked out of there at the end of the day with lists of things that we did a free pen test for them. We did these threat modeling exercises on it. Like, we wrote their entire infrastructure up on a whiteboard, and we put our hacker hat on. We're like, all right, if I was you, knowing what I know after this is how I would start attacking you. And you just started seeing light bulbs go off. And I think like that accountability piece, not that we were creating accountability, but one, that education, and then I think that piece of like holding yourself accountable to that continuous improvement. And if maybe you don't love the two-factor authentication that your vendor is providing you right now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't enable it. Enable it, and then tell your vendor, I need more options. I need a solution that works better for me, right? Go to SSO, bring your own. You ask your vendor, do you have a plan for SSO? When are you going to support that? Because at the end of the day, we do recognize you have 7 different technologies, each with a different factor. Now you got your techs have 7 TOTP apps on their phone. That's not the best experience for them, but so I think right now this is where there's a little cooperation that we need to we're trying to move things forward, make it easier for you, but also help you protect yourselves at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, and you bring up the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's a big component for us. It's how we communicate what we want MSPs to communicate to their customers, leveraging the framework. It's how we're communicating with MSPs, right? And we have a whole tool built around the darn thing. So it's very important to go back to the basics of a framework, right? So we're dancing between talking about technologies and talking about a framework, but the framework's very important just to establish the baseline. But some of the things, and Kyle, one of the conversations you and I had, yesterday, and in fact, Ryan, I know we talked about it as well, is that in some cases, the MSP community has done such a great job of making themselves a very efficient machine. You've followed all the rules. You've got this ticket count down to something that's really cool and marginal, humming along. And sometimes, you're a victim of your own success, right? And with that not being, negative, but it's like you do things so well, but, at the same time, this threat community is moving along and it's getting faster. Yeah. We've got to pull back a little bit and take a look at that and see how it impacts our current business today.
Yeah. So this goes back to kind of what I was talking about originally, how we've moved everyone to the cloud, thinking it's secure without realizing there's pinhole access with the user creds and where identity access management comes into play. So what I'm hearing, kind of a call to action for our MSPs, is basically go back, make a list of all the tools you use, whether or not MFA is enabled, do they have API integration with each other, are they using API keys, are they not, do they support IP whitelisting, anything that you can shore up your security with your identity with your individual vendors. And then areas where they aren't supporting MFA or API keys, hound those vendors. Make them realize that you care about security just as much as they do, and you want this in place. So with identity access management, it's really about kind of figuring out your framework, right? What are all the tools you're using? How are you accessing those? What type of security is in place? And asking the question, is there a place to add more security?
Yeah. I think there's one thing on that piece that we didn't touch on. So we and I'll share a quick story first. We did something similar to what ID Agent does, but for our users, we kind of ran them through a hacking exercise and a cracking exercise to see if they were using vulnerable credentials that would be easily guessed or reused or already known to be compromised on the dark web. And then we see MSPs getting breached, and we have some of that data. And when they let us know which user account it was, we can actually go back to that data. And we've actually seen multiple scenarios. It's not a previously compromised account that's known in the dark web or in the previous dumps. And this goes, I think, like right into your bread and butter. Like, how do you think they're getting those creds? And phishing, is it?
So yeah, so there's a couple of things. So I don't know, not seeing what you're specifically talking about. Some of it is that it may have been a previously compromised password, though, right? Maybe not a full credential set. The other is it's through phishing, and that's the primary mechanism for collecting these credentials is through phishing campaigns.
It just works, right?
It really does. And it's just getting more and more prolific. You can, whether it be something that is, significant or like well-funded, or you can buy the phishing kits and deploy them really cheap. There's even instructions out there for you to just build your own.
Some come with white labeling.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's true. It's the same sort of thing. And then you get, and then there's deals, packages associated with it. Hey, you want templates in 16 different languages? It's that easy. And
we see a lot of MSPs that do phishing training and phishing exercises for the customers, but don't do it for themselves. And so it's like, the call to action here is put your oxygen mask on first. Do this stuff for yourself. Get your house in order, because they're coming for you first and your end user second. You've done such a great job of securing your end customer and caring and feeding them that you need to at some point take a look and help yourself too, because you're hitting some turbulence, and you got to put that oxygen mask on.
There's a little bit of we were talking before, is a little bit as security professionals, there at times can be a little bit of that cognitive dissonance, where we talk about to our customers about security and things like that, but it doesn't match up with some of the practices that are going on in our own houses. And that's a huge thing, and building the same sort of culture of security that you would want to see in your client space to prevent you from being at risk from attackers that are hitting them, you would want to be able to apply to yourself as well.
And I would even throw out there too, I mean, aside from all of that, and when was the last time you really took a good look at your incident response plan and really went through an exercise? I mean, Brian, you did that on the fly, right?
We made our incident response plan that Monday morning when it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't recommend that.
Right.
Have one in place ahead of time.
And make it like we don't have to make it so complicated. You don't need a 50-page incident response plan. Where you start is getting your 2 best techs in a room on a Friday before you head home, and you just throw this scenario out on a whiteboard and you start talking to them and you run through the scenario. It's how would we respond to this? And just start there. It doesn't have to be anything more complicated than that. If you just start the conversation, the momentum will build. Don't sit down and think you have to write a 50-page plan and a policy to go with it. Just get in a room and model the thing and figure out how you would respond to it, and then start thinking about how to write down some of that stuff and institutionalize some of that knowledge. It doesn't have to be complicated.
You know, and just like we're sitting here collaborating, right? You know, you folks should be collaborating with peer MSPs. Ask them what they do well, what they don't do well. I mean, we're all in this thing together, guys, right? So, you know, it has to be about collaboration. So, you know, Ryan, to your point, that is great advice, because I've actually written, but I've seen, you know, some of these 25, 50-page IR plans, and when something happens, nobody goes near it because there's no time, right? So it has to be simple, it's got to be effective, but it's got to address the issues that, you know, are most relevant to you today, and don't be afraid to talk to your peers.
All right, so I'm hearing, you know, identity access management. I'm hearing incident response, have that in place, you know, ahead of time, so you're not making it on the fly. We talked about backups being kind of, you know, a go-to if they haven't been deleted. What about insurance, cybersecurity insurance, right?
Yeah.
That's something everyone should have right now.
Yes, I agree. I have some very strong feelings on this and things to share, but I if someone else wants to go first.
Someone wants to take the polarizing.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we all agree cybersecurity insurance, just like your car insurance, saves the bacon. I think not all insurances are created equally is probably just another common sense. We have seen it directly where we've seen up to $1 million payouts from insurance policies. We have seen the exact opposite side where you had to fight tooth and nail, and I don't know enough about your situation, but you said roughly $150K was covered by your insurance side of the house.
Yes, apparently I was a good steward of my policy. I minimized damages and costs, and then therefore they didn't believe that the breach was as serious as it was, so they didn't give me as much money, is ultimately what happened.
Yeah, I think like this is the scenario where if you don't have a cyber policy, go get one. 2, maybe even 2, split your coverage over multiple carriers in smaller policies.
So thank you.
And you know that way, you know, if you hit one scenario with one vendor where it won't pay out, maybe the other carrier will. So I think diversify your risk there. 2, I wouldn't go advertising to the world that you carry a $3 million, $5 million cyber liability policy, because guess what the attackers are doing? They're looking to see who's carrying large cyber liability policies, because like the first thing that the insurance company does if your backups are destroyed and there's nothing else that you can do to recover, they're going to send in an expert to help you negotiate your ransom payment, because that's the only way to get you back in business. And that's part of their business model. They know this. This is what they're going to do to make sure that they get paid that ransom, so they know, hey, if I can get in there, I can encrypt all them, I can delete the backups, I can kill every other recovery mechanism, then this person has cyber liability insurance. That's guaranteed payday. They're sitting back waiting for the phone call to negotiate the ransom payment. Like that's a good day for them. I think.
Yeah, I mean, the other 2 things I've seen, you know, I mean, that's absolutely true. And I think it's funny when you really think about it, that people advertise, next thing you know, they get hit. It's comical, right? But 2 things that I would say that I've seen are challenging is you really need to make sure that that policy covers your threat and risk environment today, right? Because oftentimes, like, companies will go out and get a cyber risk insurance policy 3 years ago, and that's not really applicable to, you know, the threat environment today. So, you know, you should really, if you haven't looked at it, you should dust it off, take a look at it, make sure it's relevant, because honestly, the insurance company is only going to cover those items that are contained within the policy. So that's one. The second thing, back to incident response, yes, you need to have an incident response plan. You should do the exercises, but before you start, you know, calling and dialing people as a result of an incident and hiring companies, you really need to understand what your cyber policy says, because they may not pay a claim for a company you called if you haven't called them first, because they will recommend their list of IR companies for you to use. So, make sure you don't,
Yeah.
in the heat of the moment, make a bad decision there. So those are two things that I see that I've seen companies get stung
So I
by.
think there's actually two call to actions there, right? One is you should find an IR provider that can help you in a breach scenario before it happens. You should have that person on speed dial. You should have a relationship with them. They should understand your environment. You should be ready to go. And two, you should be having a conversation with your broker and with your carrier to make sure that that IR provider is someone that they will pay the hourly rate for. It looked like you guys had something to add, so I'll hand it over.
Yeah, real quick to add on to that. So a couple of things that we talked about is the items or the things that you can put in place from a protection, like a preventative measures, and then what happens once an incident occurs. One of the key pieces that needs to be a part of that holistic strategy is the capability to monitor what's going on, whether it be external threat monitoring through threat intelligence tools or dark web monitoring or whatever, or as well as internal monitoring, whether that be the network traffic, the internal behaviors that are going on through your users, and all the activity logs that are going on. Someone actually has to be watching it to be able to inform you that something needs to be happening.
And those are going to be key in defending
Yeah.
whether or not, if you have to go to litigation, arguing how and proving how you're not negligent.
Yep.
That defense in depth is part of what justifies, were you just negligent, or were you did all your best effort that a reasonable person or a reasonable company could have done?
There's one more thing on the insurance policy front that I think I just learned from our mutual friend Chris. We talk about how the ransom payments are increasing. They've actually started to eclipse the extortion payment coverage of your plans. So as you're renegotiating your policies, go back and look at whether or not your extortion payment will actually cover like a $500,000 ransom payment. And if it doesn't, that's where you got to start chunking up into different policies. But I'll hand it back to Brian.
Yeah, we're actually got a few minutes left. Got kind of a open question I wanted to add, because part of the reasons I wanted to be part of this, be the moderator here is, for me, this is amazing, seeing these vendors up here on stage working together to help improve security for partners. I mean, it's really the hackers versus us. We need to team up together, partners and vendors, and even clients. So I want to get an idea, maybe if someone wants to speak to what do you feel like has been working and hasn't been working? What are we going to do to try to come to the table and battle these hackers? I know this is kind of a first step here. We're all up on stage and we're sharing information and trying to spread the word. Would anyone like to speak to that at all?
Mind if I start first?
Yeah, go ahead, Kyle.
I mean, we've had our state of the channel. This is it. We're all aware that this is an incident. Just like your relationships with your spouse, communication.
Yeah.
We as vendors are starting to get better. At the same time, you as the partners have valuable data that helps benefit everybody. Your other partners, how you handled a claim. You don't want to open yourself up for liability, and that's not what I'm saying, but you need to have a clear communication plan on what you can share to your customers, what you can share with vendors. And Brian, you're doing this right now for us. You're sharing your story so other people learn from it. We're sharing what we've seen, so I would harp on that.
Yeah, I want to add something real quick. My personal experience, what I realized is that I don't have anything on my local network anywhere. I'm 100% in the cloud. So after this security breach, I've been working diligently to get involved with every single one of my vendors and be part of their partner advisory boards if I can, attend meetings, give them feedback on how to improve their products, because ultimately I can only provide as good of a service as the tools that I'm using can provide, and these vendors are creating these tools and keeping them secure for us. So I love the fact that I'm seeing like a partner vendor come together and let's come together and team up against the hackers, is ultimately what I want to see.
Yeah, I think we're moving in that direction. I think initially it's a little bit of shock and awe, and everyone's trying to figure out, well, whose fault was it? I think at the end of the day, like we're all in this together. We're all moving in the same direction. We're all sprinting in the same direction. Vendors have some things that they need to do to secure their their platforms, given the misuse of intended functionality, which is exactly what's happening, right? And at the same point, there's things that you can do to shore up your defenses, and like, let's just continue to collaborate and move this thing forward together. I think the more we can band together, the better off we're going to be.
Totally agree.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone, Kyle, Nick, Ryan, John, Brian Weiss. Thank everyone for attending, and we're looking forward to doing more of these.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.